In 2021, 12 newly constructed high-rise buildings in Kunming, China were demolished. Not because they were dangerous or poorly built, but because they stood in the way of meeting a local GDP growth target. This wasn't just an isolated event. It was symbolic of how China has pursued economic development for decades. The model was simple: build fast, build big, and deal with the consequences later. For years, local governments prioritized construction and infrastructure projects, often without a clear long-term plan, simply to boost economic numbers. This approach created the illusion of growth, where activity, even if unproductive, still counted toward GDP. You could tear down a building and rebuild it, and it would still count as growth. But while this strategy worked in the past, it's now becoming unsustainable. China is entering a new phase where quality, sustainability, and real productivity matter more than just hitting numbers on a spreadsheet. The mirage of GDP growth, GDP, or gross domestic product, is often used to measure the health of an economy. But here's the thing: GDP doesn't care if the activity is productive or beneficial. You could build a highway, tear it down, and then rebuild the same highway again, and all of that would still count as economic growth. It's the money being spent that gets recorded, not whether that money is being spent wisely. So, while the numbers may go up on paper, the reality on the ground might not improve at all. In China, many local officials figured this out early. To meet government-set GDP growth targets, they started pouring money into large, highly visible projects, buildings, roads, bridges, shopping malls, regardless of whether these projects were needed. The goal wasn't always to solve real problems or improve people's lives. It was to show progress, meet quotas, and gain political favor. This strategy, often called vanity infrastructure, helped boost GDP numbers quickly and made local leaders look successful. For a while, this model worked. It helped China grow at an incredible pace, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But now, the cracks are starting to show. Many of these projects were not sustainable. Some were never even finished. Others were demolished shortly after completion because they served no purpose. As a result, resources were wasted and public trust was eroded. The truth is, economic growth that doesn't translate into real benefits, like better jobs, safer housing, or improved services, isn't true progress. It's just activity for activity's sake. And now, as China's economy matures, this old model of build to grow is becoming harder to justify. The country needs to shift from quantity to quality, toward growth that actually makes life better for everyday people. Enter the new strategy. China's old model of economic growth, based on non-stop construction and mass production, is losing momentum. The country is no longer the low-cost factory of the world that it once was. As China's economy matures, the leadership in Beijing is setting its sights on something different. Instead of focusing on physical infrastructure like factories and housing blocks, China is pivoting toward high-tech industries such as artificial intelligence, robotics, and smart devices. These sectors are not just about making things, they're about making life better, more efficient, and more connected. This shift represents a major transformation. For decades, China's growth came from investing heavily in construction and manufacturing, but those industries are starting to plateau. Now Beijing is betting on innovation to drive the next phase of development. The goal is to move up the global value chain away from cheap labor and into high-skilled, high-tech production. From 2025 to 2035, China aims to maintain an average annual growth rate of 5%. That might sound modest compared to past decades, but it's still ambitious for a large, more developed economy. If China can pull it off, its GDP per capita, how much each person earns on average, will double compared to 2020 levels. In economic terms, this would officially place China among the world's high-income countries alongside nations like Germany, Japan, and the United States. But achieving that goal won't just depend on new technologies. It will also require systemic change, from how China educates its workforce to how it supports small businesses and encourages people to spend. In short, this is not just an economic shift, it's a social and cultural transformation. And whether China can make that leap will define its future for decades to come. The real growth challenge. There's a key part of economic growth that often gets overlooked: consumption. True wealth isn't just about how much a country produces, it's about how much its people buy, use, and enjoy. In China's case, this is where things get tricky. Household consumption, the money families spend on goods and services, only makes up around 39% of China's GDP. That's incredibly low compared to other major economies. In the United States, it's about 68%. In the United Kingdom, 62%. In Brazil and South Africa, over 60% as well. This means that while China produces a massive amount of goods, its own people aren't spending enough to drive the economy forward. Instead, they save a large portion of their income, over 30% on average. Compare that to Americans, who typically save less than 10%. This high saving rate is deeply rooted in Chinese culture and history. For generations, Chinese families have learned to be cautious with money. After living through political instability, natural disasters, and economic hardship, saving became second nature. That habit only intensified after the COVID-19 pandemic. During lockdowns, many people saw their jobs and incomes threatened. Even after restrictions were lifted, that fear didn't go away. Households became even more careful, choosing to save rather than spend. As a result, money that could have gone into shopping, dining, travel, or housing stayed in the bank. The problem is, when people don't spend, businesses struggle, sales go down, profits shrink, and companies stop hiring or even shut down. So while saving seems responsible, too much of it can slow down the entire economy. For China to reach its goal of becoming a high-income country, it must convince its people not just to earn more, but to spend more. And that shift is easier said than done. Deflation danger. While much of the world is grappling with rising prices and inflation, China is facing the opposite problem: deflation. At first glance, deflation might sound like a good thing. After all, who doesn't like lower prices? But in reality, it's a dangerous sign for any economy. For over 18 months, prices in China have been steadily falling. And that's not a sign of healthy competition or cost-cutting. It's a symptom of weakening demand. When prices drop, people often delay their purchases. Why buy now when you think it'll be cheaper next month? This behavior spreads quickly, especially when households are already cautious. So, spending slows. Businesses feel the pressure and respond by cutting prices further just to attract customers. But that also means lower revenue. Lower revenue leads to cost cutting, and that often results in layoffs, wage freezes, or even business closures. This chain reaction can spiral out of control. As more people lose jobs or fear for their financial security, they spend even less. Consumer confidence collapses, and the economy grinds to a halt. At the same time, debt becomes harder to pay off, because while prices fall, the actual amount you owe doesn't change. So, the value of that debt, in real terms, increases, putting more pressure on borrowers. This is exactly what China is trying to avoid. The country has the world's second largest economy, but it's now walking a tightrope. On one side, there's a cautious public unwilling to spend. On the other, a business sector desperate for demand. Deflation might not grab headlines the way inflation does, but its long-term effects can be just as harmful, if not worse. For China to avoid a prolonged slowdown, reversing this trend and boosting consumer confidence is absolutely critical. The government's plan. So, what is China doing to tackle these economic challenges? The country's leadership has laid out a clear and ambitious plan to shift the focus toward boosting consumer spending. At the core of this strategy is a simple idea: put more money directly into people's hands. The government wants to encourage households to spend more and save less, helping to create a stronger, more balanced economy. To make this happen, China is focusing on three main goals. First, they want to increase the income of workers by raising minimum wages so people have more disposable income to spend. Second, the government aims to reduce the need for excessive saving by expanding social safety nets like pensions and healthcare subsidies. This helps ease worries about the future, so families feel more confident spending today. Third, they want to move money from those who save a lot to those who will spend it, effectively getting money circulating more in the economy. Alongside these goals, China plans to improve paid leave policies and increase support for childcare, making it easier for families to balance work and life. Affordable housing is also a key focus, aiming to reduce the financial burden on households and encourage spending elsewhere. All these efforts together represent a significant fiscal stimulus worth about 2% of China's GDP, signaling the government's strong commitment to this economic transition. The overall message is straightforward. China wants people to spend more money, save less, and help the economy grow faster. It's a bold shift from the past decades focused on production and investment. But whether this plan will succeed depends on how willing Chinese households are to change long-standing saving habits and embrace a new way of thinking about money. A race against demographics. There's a huge challenge that China can't ignore: its aging population. The country is getting older and much faster than expected. Birth rates have been falling for 3 years in a row, and if this trend continues, China's population could shrink dramatically from over 1.4 billion today to about 760 million by the year 2100. That's a massive drop. To understand the scale of this, consider this. In 2023, China's median age, the point where half the population is younger and half is older, was the same as Japan's in 1995. Japan is now known for having one of the oldest populations in the world, and that aging has created serious economic challenges. As people grow older, there are fewer workers available to support the economy and fewer young consumers to drive demand. This means slower economic growth, less innovation, and less energy in the workforce. Other countries have faced similar problems. Japan, for example, experienced long economic stagnation after its population aged rapidly. Germany managed better by accepting large numbers of immigrants, which helped keep its workforce younger and more dynamic. But China faces a different situation, as immigration is not a major part of its strategy or culture. The aging population affects everything, from production and consumption to entrepreneurship and innovation. With fewer workers and more retirees, the country's economic momentum will slow down. This demographic shift could undermine China's ambitions to become a high-income country. So, while China is investing heavily in technology and innovation to offset these challenges, the reality is clear: an aging population is one of the biggest obstacles China must overcome. How it handles this demographic change will shape its economic future for decades to come. Betting on AI and innovation. Beijing's main response to the challenge of an aging population and a shrinking workforce is a heavy investment in AI and robotics. The idea is that automation can help fill the gaps left by fewer workers. Factories equipped with robots can keep producing goods without relying on large numbers of human employees. Smart technologies and artificial intelligence can improve efficiency in many sectors, from manufacturing to services, helping to keep the economy moving forward even as the working age population declines. This strategy could buy China some valuable time. By increasing productivity through automation, China hopes to maintain steady economic growth despite demographic headwinds. AI can handle repetitive tasks, analyze huge amounts of data faster than humans, and even support decision-making. Robots can work 24/7 without breaks or vacations, meaning industries can run at higher capacity with fewer interruptions. However, there's a critical limitation to this approach. While AI and robots can replace human labor in many ways, they don't create the same kind of economic demand that people do. Machines don't go shopping, don't pay rent, and don't take family vacations. They don't buy products or services, which means they don't drive consumer spending, one of the key engines of a healthy economy. Consumer demand is essential for growth. When people spend money, businesses make profits, invest in new ventures, and hire more employees. Without that human spending power, even the most advanced technology can only do so much to stimulate the economy. AI and robotics increase supply and efficiency, but don't create the demand needed to sustain long-term growth. In other words, automation can help China cope with fewer workers, but it can't replace the role of human consumers in driving the economy. China still needs people to buy things, start businesses, and innovate in ways that technology alone can't replicate. The challenge for Beijing is to balance these investments in automation with efforts to encourage consumer spending and adapt to an aging society. This means that while AI and robotics are important tools for China's economic future, they aren't a silver bullet. The country must find ways to ensure people have the income, confidence, and opportunities to spend and participate fully in the economy. Without this balance, China risks falling into a cycle of growth that is efficient but hollow, fast production without the demand to sustain it. For decades, China grew by building for the world. Now, it must learn to build for itself. That means shifting from quantity to quality, from exports to experiences, from investment to people. It's not easy. It won't happen overnight. But if China gets it right, it won't just become a rich nation. It will have rewritten the playbook on how to get there. I'm Chervin from Caspian Report. Thank you for watching.